Have you ever been judged before anyone even knew your name? Imagine walking onto a plane not as a celebrity, not as a victim, but simply as a man heading home. You've worked your whole life to earn respect. Yet in one single glance, a stranger decides you don't belong in the seat you paid for. That's what happened to Marcus Grant, a black CEO, a man who built an empire from nothing. He boarded Flight 702 with nothing but calm and dignity. But 28 minutes later, that same flight, that same airline was grounded across the nation. What could possibly happen in 28 minutes that would bring an entire company to its knees? This isn't just a story about discrimination. It's about choice. The choice to stay silent or to stand, even when standing means sitting still. Now imagine it was you. Would you have spoken up? Would you have walked away? Or would you have done what Marcus did? Stay seated, not out of defiance, but out of faith that the truth can still rise quietly. Because sometimes, the most powerful statement isn't made with anger, but with stillness. Stay with me, because what happened next didn't just change one man's life. It changed the way an entire industry sees humanity. If this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so more people can feel what happens when silence speaks louder than words. The voice came soft at first, polite even. "Sir, I'm afraid you'll need to move. That seat's reserved for one of our executive platinum members." Marcus Grant looked up from his tablet, blinking as if surfacing from another world. The cabin lights above Gate 17 bathed the first-class row in a warm, artificial glow, the kind that made time feel slower. Outside the window, the afternoon sun lay low over the tarmac of Chicago O'Hare, painting the wings of the waiting jets in amber. He smiled, small and calm. "This is my seat," he said, his tone measured, steady. He lifted his boarding pass 2A, printed clear as day. Beside the words, Aero West Airlines Flight 702 to New York. The flight attendant hesitated. She looked no older than 30, badge reading Kara Hastings. There was no hostility in her voice yet, only the stiffness of someone trained to smile through discomfort. "Sir, there seems to be a mix-up. Our records show this seat belongs to a Mr. Lehman." Behind her stood a man and woman in expensive leisure wear, mid-50s, the kind of couple who'd perfected the art of being quietly entitled. The man's brow furrowed as he glanced at Marcus, then at Kara, then back at Marcus again. "We booked this flight weeks ago," he said, his tone clipped. "We always sit up front." Marcus kept the same half-smile. "Then I guess we'll be good neighbors," he replied. A few passengers nearby turned their heads. The hum of the boarding line faltered, like a radio tuning off station. Somewhere in the distance, a baby cried, somewhere else. The final boarding announcement echoed through the speakers. It was a normal afternoon until it wasn't. Kara leaned slightly closer. "Sir, could I see your ticket again?" Marcus handed it over without a word. She scanned the barcode, eyes flicking to her handheld device. Her lips pressed together. The silence between beeps grew heavy. "Mr. Grant," she said finally, "it seems the system hasn't updated. I'll ask you to wait by the galley while we confirm." Marcus looked down at the tablet still in his lap, open to a keynote presentation titled "Integrity in the Age of Automation." The irony almost made him laugh. He rose slowly. "I'll stay right here." "Thank you," he said. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The air around them tightened. The Lehmans exchanged a look, the kind shared by people unused to resistance. Kara drew a quick breath, stepped back, and murmured into her earpiece. To an outsider, it was nothing. A brief confusion before takeoff, But within 28 minutes, every plane wearing Aero West's Silver Falcon logo would be grounded. Boardrooms would light up, phones would ring, and a single act of quiet defiance would ripple through an entire industry. For now, though, there was only the sound of suitcase wheels and the faint hiss of conditioned air. Marcus exhaled, eyes fixed on the runway. He'd learned long ago that dignity didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it simply stayed seated. Kara returned with a new face in tow, a man in a navy vest marked customer liaison. He smiled, practiced and empty. Mr. Grant. Right. We're so sorry for the inconvenience. Would you mind stepping aside so we can resolve this? We'll find you another seat, equally comfortable. Marcus studied him. Behind the man's polite tone lived a threat as old as the country itself, soft, smiling, and absolute. I appreciate your offer, Marcus said, but I've paid for this seat. I'll remain until the record matches the truth. The liaison's smile thinned. Sir, I don't want to escalate. Marcus interrupted gently. Then don't. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. A few rows back. Someone raised a phone. Another passenger, a young woman with a press badge on her laptop bag, watched intently. The liaison turned, whispering to Kara. She nodded and walked toward the cockpit. Marcus could hear fragments, uncooperative. First class. Security protocol. He sighed. He'd seen this pattern before in boardrooms, in conferences, in the subtle tremor of someone realizing the power dynamic wasn't what they thought. He unlocked his phone, thumb hovering over a single contact labeled Ava, HQ. Not yet, he thought. Give them a chance. Outside, a luggage cart rattled past. A thin line of vapor trailed from a departing jet, dissolving against the pale sky. The seconds ticked by, small and deliberate. The Lehman shifted, impatience rising. The wife muttered something about people who always make trouble. Marcus heard it, said nothing. His silence was the sharpest response of all. At 3:47 p.m., Kara returned. Her voice had changed tighter, unsure. Mr. Grant, I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to leave the aircraft. Failure to comply could result in... He raised a hand lightly. Kara, is it? She nodded. You're just following orders. I understand. He stood, retrieved his phone, and said quietly into the receiver, Ava, initiate protocol Athena. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't glare. But the atmosphere in cabin 1 shifted, like the pressure before a storm. The liaison frowned. What did you just... Marcus pocketed the phone. Please, continue your process. No one noticed that. At that very moment, an automated alert pinged across a private network spanning 6 states, an internal monitoring system tied to ethics compliance for major Aero West investors. The clock had started. 28 minutes. Marcus sat back down, folded his hands, and stared through the window. On the runway, a plane lifted into the sunset, wings cutting through light and shadow. Somewhere deep inside him, an old memory stirred his father. After losing a job to a prejudice he couldn't name, telling him, Son, never shout to prove your worth. Just make sure they can't ignore your silence. He smiled faintly. Yes, Dad, he whispered. Just like that. Outside. The engines hummed. Inside, the story had already begun to move. When people later tried to piece together what really happened that afternoon at O'Hare, most of them started at the wrong place. They began with the argument, the flight delay, or the viral clip that flooded the internet an hour later. But the story didn't start there. It began earlier, with a man sitting quietly by Gate 17, holding a coffee that had long gone cold. Marcus Grant always arrived early to airports. He liked watching the choreography of travelers, the rushed goodbyes, the hesitant hellos, the way people carried their lives in small zippered bags. To him, airports were proof that the world could still move, no matter how divided it felt. That day, he wore a navy suit, no tie, the top button undone. A simple leather briefcase sat beside him, the initials M.G. embossed near the handle. Every now and then, he checked his watch, not out of impatience but habit. Time, to Marcus, was the one currency he refused to waste. A little girl across from him was coloring a picture of a rainbow plane. Her mother apologized for the noise, but Marcus smiled. "Don't," he said. "We need more color in airports." The mother laughed softly. It was the kind of small human moment he cherished unnoticed, ordinary but honest. He scrolled through his keynote slides on the tablet, preparing for a conference in New York. The talk was titled Ethics and Accountability in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. It wasn't the first time he'd been invited to speak on the topic, but it still mattered to him. NovaMind Technologies had built its reputation on AI systems that could audit bias in corporate processes, especially in hiring and customer service. It was his life's work, born out of too many personal moments where bias had been invisible until it wasn't. Behind the confidence, there was memory. When Marcus was 12, his father, Harold Grant, worked at an auto parts plant in Detroit. He lost his job after refusing to take blame for a safety error caused by poor equipment. The official report called it disciplinary restructuring. The truth was simpler. They needed a scapegoat. Harold never complained, but Marcus remembered his father's face the night he came home, hands trembling over a cold dinner. That memory shaped him more than any degree, any title, any boardroom victory ever could. At Gate 17, an overhead announcement broke his thoughts. Aero West Flight 702 to New York is now boarding first-class passengers. He gathered his things, nodded politely to the mother and child, and walked toward the gate. The attendant scanned his ticket, smiled automatically, and said, "Have a great flight, Mr. Grant." Nothing unusual. Nothing that hinted the next half hour would shake an entire airline. Inside the jet bridge, the air smelled faintly of fuel and new carpet. Marcus thought about his father again, about the phrase he'd said 100 times. "Son, dignity isn't what they give you. It's what you refuse to lose." He didn't know that line would echo louder than ever before by the end of the day. He stepped into the first-class cabin, greeted the crew with a nod, and found his seat 2A, window side, the kind of seat built for people who are used to being listened to. He slipped off his jacket, placed it neatly over the armrest, and powered down his tablet. The flight attendant, Kara Hastings, offered him a glass of water and a polite smile. He thanked her, opened a book instead of scrolling his phone, and let his shoulders sink into the leather. Everything about that moment felt calm, the kind of calm that happens right before a thunderclap. Kara's voice came through the intercom a few minutes later, slightly strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, please make sure your devices are in airplane mode. We'll be departing shortly." Marcus barely looked up. Outside, a cargo truck beeped as it reversed along the runway. The hum of the engines was soothing. Then came the sound of heels clicking down the aisle sharp, purposeful, followed by the muffled murmur of an older couple. He caught fragments of their conversation. "I don't understand. They always give us 2A and B. Maybe someone's sitting there by mistake." He didn't realize they meant him until the woman's perfume hit the air beside his shoulder. "Excuse me," she said, her tone clipped but wrapped in courtesy. I think you're in our seats. Marcus turned. Calm. 2A, he said, showing the boarding pass. The man behind her frowned, eyes darting between Marcos's face and the ticket like he was solving a puzzle that didn't make sense to him. That was how it started, small, civil, almost forgettable. Yet inside those few seconds was a whole history who was expected to belong and who was expected to move. Kara returned, her expression tight. She'd seen this before. Every airline employee had the polite misunderstandings that weren't misunderstandings at all. She took the Lehman's side instinctively, not out of malice, but habit. Authority leaned toward familiarity. Marcus, with his quiet composure, was the anomaly in her pattern. As she checked the seat log, Marcus's mind wandered again, not away, but inward. He thought about all the conferences where he'd been introduced as the exception, the panels where people asked about diversity success stories instead of asking about the structures that made diversity a story in the first place. He never liked the word exception. It always implied someone had decided the rule didn't apply to you temporarily. "Sir," Kara said softly, "it seems there's been an issue with the booking system. Could you wait near the galley while we sort it out?" He looked at her, then at the couple standing beside her, arms crossed, waiting. "I'd prefer to stay seated," he said, "the same way one might say, I'd prefer to breathe." She nodded once and walked off to call a supervisor. The Lehmans exchanged glances, a silent exchange of judgment that Marcus had learned to recognize since childhood. He turned back toward the window, exhaling slowly. The hum of the engines deepened. Outside, the last of the daylight began to fade into gold. He reached for his phone again, almost reflexively. The contact labeled Ava, HQ, glowed on the screen. His thumb hovered, but didn't press. Not yet, he thought. Always give them a chance. In that moment, his mind split in two, the executive who understood systems and the man who had lived under them. The first said, "Stay calm. Let the policy work." The second said, "You've seen this movie too many times." He chose silence, because sometimes silence spoke louder than any speech. Across the aisle, the young woman with the press badge Elena Cruz watched. She didn't know who Marcus was, only that he carried himself like someone who didn't need to prove anything. She noticed the tension, the way the couple whispered, the way Kara's polite tone hardened by the minute. Elena's instincts told her to keep her phone close. Stories like this had a way of turning fast. Marcus adjusted his jacket, looked out at the runway again, and thought about the word integrity. It wasn't a slogan for him. It was armor. The kind forged from years of swallowing pride in rooms full of people who mistook patience for permission. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "Whatever happens, stay who you are." Moments later, Kara returned with a man in a navy vest. Marcus could see it in his eyes before he spoke. He knew this pattern by heart. The words would come like clockwork. "Mr. Grant," the man said, "I'm with customer liaison. We've had a system issue. If you'll just step aside, we'll get you another seat." Marcus looked at him calmly. "I'll remain where I am until the record matches the truth." The man smiled tightly. "Sir, I don't want to escalate." Marcus nodded once. "Then don't." There it was again, that silence. Heavy, certain. The kind of silence that made everyone else doubt themselves. It was 3:39 p.m. when Kara whispered into her earpiece for the third time. It was 3:41 when Marcus finally unlocked his phone. And by 3:47 when he said the words, "Ava, initiate Protocol Athena." The course of the entire airline began to change quietly, invisibly, like a storm forming behind clear skies. Outside, a jet took off into the sunset, engines roaring against the wind. Inside, Marcus Grant leaned back in seat 2A, eyes calm, heart steady, and waited for the truth to catch up. The cabin was silent again, but not the peaceful kind. It was the silence that arrives after something small and sharp cuts through the air. The kind of silence that means everyone is pretending not to listen. Marcus Grant could feel the weight of it pressing against his chest as he sat back in his seat, eyes fixed on the window, but mind somewhere else. Outside. The lights along the runway flickered like faint stars trying to be seen against the pale dusk. Inside, something darker was taking shape. Kara Hastings stood near the galley, one hand resting on her radio. She wasn't a cruel woman, not by nature. She had seen hundreds of passengers, thousands of flights, and she'd learned how to smile through anything: delays, arguments, even the occasional meltdown. But this was different. Something about this man, his calm refusal, made her uneasy. It wasn't arrogance, it was conviction. And conviction, in her line of work, often spelled trouble. She whispered into her earpiece, "Gate, this is Hastings in first. We've got a non-compliant passenger. Seat 2A. Please advise." The voice that came back was casual, tired. "Copy that. Security on standby. Try to resolve it quietly." Kara sighed, quietly. Everything in this job had to be quiet. Quiet apologies, quiet removals, quiet shame. Across from her, the Lehmans were still standing, arms crossed, faces flushed. Mrs. Lehman muttered something under her breath about people who think they can just take what they want. Her husband nodded, adding, "If they'd just cooperate, we'd be in the air by now." Their words weren't loud, but they were sharp enough to slice through the calm. Marcus heard every syllable. He didn't react. Instead, he reached for the cup of water that Kara had placed earlier. The ice had melted. He took a sip anyway. His reflection in the glass looked tired, but steady. It reminded him of his father again. Harold Grant, the man who never raised his voice, even when the world tried to silence him. Marcus had inherited that quiet. It wasn't weakness. It was discipline. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. A message from Ava, his assistant back at Novamind headquarters. It read, "Protocol Athena confirmed. Monitoring systems activated. Do you want escalation or silent observation?" Marcus typed 3 words. "Observe, record, wait." He slipped the phone back into his jacket and looked up. Kara was watching him, her brow furrowed. "Mr. Grant," she began carefully, "we're trying to make sure everyone is comfortable. If you'll just allow us to reassign you." I can assure you he cut in, his voice calm but unyielding. "Kara, I know this isn't about comfort. It's about principle. And I think you know that too." For a moment, her professional mask cracked. She blinked, looked down, then turned away. The liaison reappeared, this time with a security officer trailing behind. The officer, a large man with kind eyes, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Sir," he said softly, "I'm told there's been some confusion. Maybe we can step off the plane and sort this out." Marcus looked at him, then at the rows of watching eyes, some sympathetic, others skeptical, all waiting for the story to end the way they expected. A black man being removed for being uncooperative. A headline they'd read a dozen times before. He smiled faintly. No confusion. Officer. Just an opportunity. The officer hesitated. Opportunity for what? Sir Marcus turned toward the window again. For someone to do the right thing. It was such a simple answer, but it landed heavy. Even the Lehmans went quiet. somewhere down the aisle. Elena Cruz, the young journalist, lifted her phone again, pretending to check messages while recording. Her reporter instincts were screaming that this moment mattered. Kara's radio crackled. A new voice came through, one she didn't recognize. "Hastings, this is Central Command. Hold position. Do not remove the passenger. Repeat. Do not remove. Await further instructions." Her pulse quickened. That wasn't standard protocol. She glanced toward Marcus, who was still perfectly still. The security officer frowned. "Central Command. That's above operations level." Kara nodded slowly, confusion creeping in. She didn't know it yet. But somewhere inside Aero West headquarters, a series of automated alerts had begun pinging across multiple departments: ethics compliance, investor relations, and even the CEO's office. The system labeled it Athena Level 1 Bias Event Triggered. No one in that cabin could see it, but the dominoes had already started to fall. Back inside the plane, tension twisted like wire. Marcus could feel it in his pulse. He wasn't angry. He was focused. Every part of him wanted to believe this could end with grace. But he also knew that grace sometimes needed to be forced into the light. "Mrs." Lehman spoke again, louder now, her patience gone. "I don't understand why this is taking so long. We pay for loyalty. Doesn't that mean anything anymore?" Marcus turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. "It should," he said quietly, "but loyalty shouldn't come at the cost of respect." Her mouth opened, then closed. She didn't have a response for that. Most people didn't. Kara excused herself and stepped into the galley, whispering to the liaison. "What's happening? Command just froze the process." The man's face had gone pale. Apparently, this passenger, Mr. Grant, he's not just a passenger. He's one of the primary investors in Sky Unity Holdings. Kara blinked. "That's the parent company." He nodded. "Exactly." She stood still for a moment, the weight of realization pressing on her. Every rule she thought she understood was shifting beneath her feet. "So what do we do?" she whispered. The liaison exhaled. "We wait. Out in the cabin." Marcus closed his eyes for a second. He wasn't thinking about power or revenge. He was thinking about every employee he'd seen humiliated by a broken system, every complaint buried under policy, every apology that came too late to mean anything. His father's words echoed again. "Never shout to prove your worth. Make them see your silence." Elena Cruz kept her camera rolling. Her phone caught the quiet tremor in Marcus's hand, the subtle clench of his jaw. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew what she was seeing: dignity, raw and human, being tested in real time. At 3:58 p.m., the captain stepped out of the cockpit. He was an older man, silver hair, calm authority. "What's going on here?" he asked. Kara started to explain, but he raised a hand. "No, I want to hear it from the passenger." Marcus met his gaze. "I was asked to leave the seat I purchased because someone else decided I didn't belong in it." The captain studied him, then the couple, then the crew. The air between them felt thick, heavy with unspoken history. "Finally," he said, "no one's moving anyone until we get clarity. Everyone stays seated." He turned to Kara. "And close that door. We're not leaving until I know exactly who's giving orders." In that instant, everything changed. The tone of the cabin shifted from quiet prejudice to controlled chaos. People began whispering. Phones came out. Tweets appeared. "Something's happening on Flight 702. Black CEO refuses to move. Airline staff panicking. The digital fire had begun. Marcus stayed still, almost serene. He knew what was coming, but he also knew what it would mean not for him, but for everyone watching. Sometimes, one person's stillness could shake an empire. He checked his watch. 4:02 p.m. The countdown had truly begun. Outside, the runway lights glowed brighter as the sun sank behind the skyline. Inside, the air hummed with the tension of a story about to break wide open, the kind that could only end one of two ways: silence restored, or the whole system forced to listen. Marcus didn't know yet which way it would go, but he knew this: he wouldn't move. Not this time. Not for anyone. He took a slow breath, closed his eyes, and whispered the same line that had carried him his entire life. Stay who you are. And somewhere, deep inside the network of Aero West Airlines, the system that bore his company's code was already rewriting the story for him. The hum of the airplane filled the space between heartbeats. Every passenger in first class seemed to hold their breath, waiting for something they couldn't name. Marcus Grant sat still in seat 2A, hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper, like the quiet before a verdict. He had been here before. Not in this cabin, not in this uniform of wealth and civility, but in 1,000 smaller moments where dignity had to defend itself without a weapon. Kara Hastings stood a few rows away, speaking softly with the captain. Her words came in short bursts, half apology, half confusion. I didn't mean to. I just thought. The captain's reply was calm but sharp. You thought wrong. This passenger has every right to his seat. He wasn't raising his voice, but each syllable carried weight. Kara nodded quickly. Her cheeks flushed. Yes, sir. She turned to the Lehmans, who were still standing near the aisle, frustration burning in their eyes. Mr. and Mrs. Lehman, please return to your assigned seats. The husband frowned. This is ridiculous. We're Platinum Elite members. We paid for those seats. You paid for seats, the captain replied, not the right to displace another passenger. His tone wasn't harsh, but it ended the argument. The Lehmans glared at Marcus one last time before retreating to the row behind him. Marcus didn't move. He didn't gloat. He simply exhaled and closed his eyes for a moment. In that quiet exhale was years of learned restraint, the art of being still while the world tried to shrink you. He remembered his mother telling him once, after a childhood fight at school, "Baby, sometimes you win by staying seated." He hadn't understood it then. He did now. Kara returned to her post, avoiding his eyes, but Marcus noticed her hands trembling as she secured the cabin door. He almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The damage was done. Not because of malice, but because of something far more dangerous: complacency. That word echoed in his mind, like a file name he couldn't close. Complacency was the most polite form of cruelty. A few seats back, Elna Cruz, the journalist, kept recording. She could sense the story building, not the loud kind filled with shouting or drama, but the quiet kind that hit harder because it could happen to anyone. She didn't know Marcus's name yet, but she knew she was witnessing something that would go far beyond this flight. In her lens, the calm man in 2A looked like someone who had spent his life being questioned and had simply decided to stop explaining. At 4:05 p.m., the plane still hadn't moved. Passengers were whispering, phones lighting up, text messages firing across terminals. Something's happening on Flight 702. They won't take off. A standoff in first class. Marcus ignored the buzz. He looked out the window again. watching as a line of planes waited on the runway, their tail lights glowing in the twilight. It felt poetic in a way, the whole sky waiting on one man's decision to stay seated. Inside the Aero West Control Center, the situation was no longer local. Protocol Athena had triggered system-wide alerts. Screens flashed red with automated flags. Potential bias incident detected. Priority review required. Executives in glass offices glanced at the notifications, confused, unaware that the man in seat 2A was one of the largest investors in their parent company. The compliance team scrambled to trace the origin. Someone finally read the attached metadata event recorded under NovaMind Ethics Integration System. That was Marcus's company, his technology, his code. He had built the very system that was now documenting their failure in real time. Back on the plane, Kara approached Marcus one more time, voice shaking. "Mr. Grant," she said quietly, I didn't know who you were." He looked at her, calm but firm. "It wouldn't have mattered if you did. That's the point." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She nodded, stepping back. He could see the weight of realization sink into her. It wasn't about fame or position. It was about how easy it was for ordinary bias to hide behind policy. The captain re-entered the cockpit. "Prepare for taxi," he said over the intercom. "We'll be delayed a few more minutes." But before anyone could relax, the plane's engine power dimmed, lights flickering once, then again. A voice crackled through the captain's headset control tower command, but the tone was urgent. "Flight 702, hold position. All Aero West flights are under temporary ground order pending review. Repeat, all flights grounded." The captain froze. "Say again, you heard correctly." "Sir?" Nationwide hold. Marcus felt the change before anyone said a word. The energy in the cabin shifted, subtle but palpable, like the first tremor before an earthquake. Passengers murmured. Kara's eyes widened. "Grounded all flights." The captain emerged again, voice steady but pale. "Ladies and gentlemen, there's been an operational issue. We'll remain at the gate until further notice." He didn't explain because he didn't know how. Marcus checked his watch. 4:17 p.m. 14 minutes since the call. 14 minutes since Athena had activated. He hadn't wanted it to go this far, but now it was out of his hands. He turned his phone over in his palm. A new message appeared from Ava Athena, escalation in progress. Corporate inquiry initiated at Sky Unity HQ. Livestream feed tracking at 1.2 million views. He blinked once, unreadable. The machine had done what it was built to do, shine light where people pretended not to see. "Across the aisle," Elena whispered. "Oh my God." She'd just received the notification too. Her video had started to trend under the tag, Rocker Flight 702. She looked up, meeting Marcus's eyes. "You're the guy, aren't you?" He gave a faint nod. "Just a guy in a seat." The next few minutes unfolded like slow motion. Crew members whispered into radios. Passengers scrolled through social media. A murmur swept through the cabin. They grounded the airline. "Why, who is this man?" Marcus sat perfectly still, hands folded, gaze steady. His silence was louder than any statement. At 4:24 p.m., the captain's radio buzzed again. "Command request the immediate compliance debrief with Mr. Grant." The captain turned slowly toward him. "Mr. Grant, they'd like to speak with you." Marcus nodded. "Of course." He stood, buttoning his jacket, and followed the captain toward the galley. Every eye in the cabin tracked him. The Lehmans stared, speechless now, confusion replacing indignation. Inside the galley, Carol looked pale, almost frightened. Marcus gave her a small, reassuring nod. "You did your job the way you were taught," he said softly. "Now the system will learn to do better." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was grace. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. He took the radio handset the captain handed him. The voice on the other end belonged to an executive from Aero West headquarters. "Mr. Grant, we were unaware of your presence on this flight. Please allow us to apologize." Marcus interrupted, "Not unkindly. Don't apologize to me. Fix what made this possible, and fix it publicly." The line went quiet. Finally, the voice said, "Understood." He returned to his seat, feeling the stares of a dozen passengers, some curious, some ashamed, some quietly inspired. The Lehmans wouldn't meet his eyes. Elena Cruz lowered her phone, heart pounding. She whispered to herself, "He didn't even raise his voice." Marcus looked out the window again, where the last light of day had turned the horizon into gold and violet. His reflection stared back, steady, calm, untouchable. He thought about his father, his mother, every lesson carved into his bones. He hadn't meant to start a revolution, but sometimes revolutions didn't start with speeches. They started with someone refusing to stand up when they were told to move. At 4:28 p.m., the captain's voice came over the intercom one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, Aero West Airlines has issued a temporary suspension of operations pending investigation. We appreciate your patience." A hush fell over the cabin. Outside, the runways were lined with grounded aircraft, tails shining in the fading sun. 28 minutes had passed. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the hum of the quiet engines fill his ears. It wasn't victory he felt. It was something quieter. Accountability. The sound of something breaking. Just enough to let the light in. The airport's night lights flickered across the polished metal of the aircraft, turning every reflection into something alive. Inside, time felt suspended. No one spoke above a whisper now. The hum of the engines had faded into an uneasy quiet. Marcus Grant sat motionless in his seat, eyes on the window, his thoughts moving far faster than the grounded planes outside. Around him, people scrolled through their phones, whispers spreading like ripples on water. They really stopped the whole airline. Who is he? What did he say? And the truth was, he hadn't said much at all. Across the aisle, Kara Hastings stood near the galley, her posture tight, her mind spinning. The captain had briefed her moments ago the airline's board had initiated an emergency compliance review. Flights across the country were now on hold. It was something she had never seen before. She looked at Marcus, then at the other passengers. The atmosphere had changed. Fear had turned to awe. The man in 2A wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was a storm they didn't see coming. Marcus leaned back, breathing slow, steady. His phone buzzed once more. A message from Ava appeared on the screen news channels reporting mass flight delays. Reisen Flight 702, trending globally. Over 8 million views and climbing. He didn't open it. Numbers didn't matter right now. People did. He could feel the weight of their eyes, the way even silence was beginning to shape opinion. Some looked at him with resentment, some with admiration. He wasn't seeking either. He turned slightly, meeting Kara's eyes for the first time since the grounding. She hesitated before walking over. Her voice was small, the voice of someone realizing they had stood on the wrong side of a moment that would be remembered. "Mr. Grant, I don't know what to say." He studied her face, saw the exhaustion, the regret. "Then don't say anything," he replied gently. "Just remember how it felt to be certain and wrong at the same time. She nodded, swallowing hard. "I will." For a second, he saw something human in her again, a glimpse of who she could be without the uniform and protocol. A few seats away, Elna Cruz was typing furiously on her phone. Her video had gone viral. The clip showed Marcus sitting calm, voice steady, refusing to move. The caption she'd added read, "He didn't fight, he just stayed." That single sentence had captured the internet's imagination. People didn't just see a CEO. They saw a reflection of every quiet injustice that had ever been ignored. In cafes, in living rooms, on trains, people were watching and talking. The conversation had already moved far beyond a seat on an airplane. Inside the plane, the air conditioning hummed louder than usual. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of his father again. Harold Grant, sitting at the kitchen table after losing his job all those years ago. The way his hands had trembled. Not from anger, but from disbelief. Marcus remembered asking, "Why didn't you fight back?" And his father answering, "Because I wanted you to learn there's more than one kind of strength. Tonight." Those words echoed in his chest. This wasn't revenge. It was responsibility. At 4:32 p.m., the captain received another transmission from Aero West Command. His face was pale when he turned to Kara. "They want a public statement." "From him?" Kara blinked. "From Mr. Grant?" "Yes," the captain said. "Apparently, the media already knows who he is." She looked toward Marcus, hesitant. "How should I ask him?" The captain sighed. "You don't. You let him decide." Marcus could hear every word. He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket, and said quietly, "I'll speak." The cabin went still. He didn't ask for a microphone, didn't stand at the front. He just spoke from where he was, voiced low but strong enough to carry. "I know this is inconvenient for everyone," he began. "No one likes delays, but sometimes delay is the only way to stop something worse from continuing unchecked." He paused, eyes sweeping the cabin. "What happened here isn't just about me. It's about how easily respect becomes conditional, how quickly people decide who belongs where." The passengers listened, still as statues. Even the Lehmans, now silent behind him, seemed to shrink in their seats. Every company, every institution, every person, Marcus continued, should be judged not by how they act when things go right, but by how they respond when things go wrong. His tone was even, unhurried. Today, this airline has a choice. They can fix the system quietly, behind closed doors, or they can face what they've built in front of everyone. He let the words settle. Kara found herself blinking back tears she didn't expect. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was realization. Elena's camera captured it all, the calm authority, the unflinching grace. She whispered to herself, "He's rewriting the story without raising his voice." The cabin erupted into hushed claps, not loud, not forced, just the soft sound of people who suddenly understood they were part of something bigger. Moments later, the captain's headset crackled again. "Headquarters requests full passenger deplaning. Mr. Grant will remain on board for a closed conversation." Kara moved to relay the message, but Marcus raised a hand. "No need. Let everyone hear." The captain hesitated, then nodded. "Aero West Airlines acknowledges a violation of passenger conduct policy and unconscious bias standards. All operations will remain suspended until compliance review is complete." Gas spread through the cabin. A woman in row 3 whispered, "He did it." Her husband replied softly, "No, he reminded them who they are." Marcus sat again, exhaling. His body finally felt the fatigue of everything that had led to this moment, the years of restraint, the layers of silence, the patience worn thin. He wasn't proud. He was tired. The kind of tired that comes after carrying the same lesson too long. He turned to Kara once more. "Do you know why I built Nova Mind?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "To teach machines how to recognize bias," he said, "because people kept pretending they couldn't." Her eyes glistened. "Maybe now they'll stop pretending." Elena lowered her phone, overwhelmed. For the first time, she felt the gravity of what she was recording. This wasn't just content. It was history in motion. "Mr. Grant," she said softly, "people will want to hear from you after this." He smiled faintly. "Then I'll tell them to listen to themselves first." Outside, the runway lights reflected on the plane's body like fireflies. The control tower remained dark against the horizon, waiting. At 4:39 p.m., the door opened and the first passengers began to disembark. Some nodded to Marcus as they passed. Others looked away, ashamed. The Lehmans stopped briefly, unsure what to say. Marcus spared them the effort. "Have a safe evening," he said gently. They muttered a thanks and left. No anger, no triumph, just quiet dignity. As the last of the passengers stepped off, Marcus remained seated. The cabin was empty now, except for Kara and the captain. The air felt different, lighter somehow, even in stillness. Kara approached, voice trembling. "Mr. Grant, will you ever fly with us again?" He looked up at her, expression unreadable. "That depends," he said. "Will you remember what happened when I didn't?" She nodded, tears slipping down her cheek. "Yes, I'll remember." He smiled softly. "Then maybe I will." The captain extended his hand. "Sir, I've flown for this company 22 years. I've never seen anything like this. Whatever happens next, I think it needed to happen." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Sometimes," he said, "truth just needs altitude." The captain didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. Outside, camera flashes began to appear through the airport windows. Reporters had gathered, lights reflecting off the glass. Kara looked nervous. "They're waiting for you." Marcus sighed. "Standing. They can wait a little longer. For once, I'll take my time." As he walked toward the exit, he paused and looked back at the empty cabin. Every detail seemed sharper now: the leather seats, the folded blankets, the untouched glasses of water. It all looked so ordinary, and yet it had just become extraordinary. He whispered, almost to himself, 28 minutes. And with that, he stepped into the jet bridge, leaving behind not just a flight delayed, but a system forced to look at itself in the mirror. The terminal outside the plane glowed with the dull light of evening. Passengers huddled near windows, faces pressed against the glass, watching as ground crew surrounded Flight 702. Word had already spread across the airport. Something extraordinary was happening on board that plane. And for once, it wasn't a celebrity or a scandal. It was a story about a man who stayed seated. Marcus Grant waited in the galley, his back against the cool metal of the cabin wall. The world outside was spinning faster by the second, but inside the aircraft, time moved with deliberate slowness. Kara Hastings stood nearby, headset in hand, speaking softly to someone over the radio. She looked exhausted, her perfect posture sagging under the weight of everything that had unfolded. "Mr. Grant," she said, after ending the call, "they've requested you meet with Aero West's Vice President of Operations. She's on her way to the terminal right now." Marcus nodded once. "Good. Let's talk." He didn't ask for privacy or protocol. He'd already seen what those things could hide. He simply waited. 5 minutes later, the door opened. A woman in a tailored gray suit stepped aboard, her expression calm but cautious. Laura Chen, the name tag said it all. She was known within the airline industry as the one who fixed impossible problems. Her eyes swept the cabin, taking in the empty seats, the tense crew, and finally, the man sitting in 2A. "Mr. Grant," she said, her voice professional but soft. "I'm Laura Chen. Thank you for your patience." Marcus stood to greet her. "Patience," he said quietly, "isn't the same as tolerance." She didn't flinch at the words. "I understand. I also understand that the situation has escalated far beyond what it should have." He motioned toward the empty seat across from him. "Then maybe it's time we discuss why." Laura sat down. Kara remained nearby, eyes darting between them. The plane was silent, except for the low hum of ground power. Marcus rested his hands on his knees, posture relaxed but deliberate. "I imagine your phone has been busy," he said. Laura managed a faint smile. "That's one word for it. The board is in emergency session. Our CEO has already made a public statement. We're grounding flights until we review our training and accountability systems." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's a start. But what you're reviewing isn't training. It's culture." Laura studied him. "You think we can change that overnight?" "No," he said. "But you can stop pretending it's not broken." The honesty in his tone wasn't sharp. It was surgical. He wasn't trying to wound her. He was trying to open something. She exhaled. "You've given us quite a wake-up call, Mr. Grant." He looked out the window for a moment before replying. "I didn't give you anything. You gave yourselves this moment. I just refused to move." Laura leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Why now? You've been in business long enough to know how these things usually go. Quiet settlements, polite apologies. Why not?" That Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Because quiet doesn't fix anything. It just lets the noise come back later." For a few seconds, no one spoke. Outside, the first raindrops began to tap against the window. Inside, the air felt charged, like something bigger than both of them was taking shape. He continued, "You know what my father taught me, that respect isn't what people give you when they're watching. It's what they practice when they think no one will notice. Your staff didn't see a CEO. They saw a man who didn't fit the picture they had in their minds of who belongs in seat 2A. That's not policy. That's programming." Laura sat back, absorbing his words. She had worked in aviation for 20 years. She'd seen customer complaints, PR crises, even near disasters. But this felt different. This wasn't about bad press. It was about conscience. She looked at Kara, who stood pale and silent. "Ms. Hastings," Laura said gently, "do you have anything to add?" Kara's throat tightened. "I made assumptions," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to, but I did." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I've never been trained to see how that happens. I just follow protocol." Marcus's gaze softened. "Protocol can't teach empathy," he said, "but it can stop rewarding its absence." Laura nodded. "You're right." She turned to Kara. "You won't lose your job, but you will be part of the team that rebuilds the training you wish you had." Kara blinked in surprise. "Ma'am." "You heard me," Laura said. "If we're going to change, it starts with the people who saw what went wrong up close." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's leadership." Laura met his eyes again. "Mr. Grant, I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd like to earn understanding. You said earlier that what we're facing isn't a system error, it's a moral one. I agree. I want your help to fix it. Marcus hesitated. He wasn't a man who enjoyed power plays, and he could feel that she wasn't either. Her offer wasn't strategic. It was genuine. What are you proposing? He asked. Partnership, she said simply. Your company builds ethical AI frameworks. We need that technology. We need accountability built into the structure, not tacked on afterward. If you'll allow it, I'd like to integrate NovaMind's bias detection model into our internal review process. For the first time all evening, Marcus allowed himself to breathe. It wasn't about victory, it was about potential. Then let's do it right, he said. Laura smiled. We'll call it the Athena Project. After your system. Marcus looked out the window again, rain streaking the glass. Athena, he repeated softly. Wisdom before war. The two of them sat in silence for a moment. Outside, ground crew were moving again, signaling that the hold might soon lift. Inside, something invisible had already shifted a quiet reconciliation, the kind that happens not through apology, but through responsibility. Kara cleared her throat softly. Mr. Grant, she said, I want to thank you for not shouting, for not humiliating me back. He turned toward her, expression warm. Change doesn't start with humiliation, he said. It starts with recognition. She smiled weakly, relief breaking through the guilt. A soft chime from Marcus's phone drew his attention. A message from Ava flashed on the screen. Athena review complete. Media reporting full airline suspension. Public sentiment positive. Trending message, dignity doesn't need volume. He read it twice before slipping the phone away. He rose slowly, straightened his jacket, and looked at Laura. I'll meet with your board tomorrow morning. But for now, let your people rest. They've been through enough tonight. Laura extended her hand. Thank you, Mr. Grant. He shook it firmly. Don't thank me. Just follow through. When he stepped off the plane, a wave of camera flashes met him. Reporters shouted his name. Questions flew through the air. Mr. Grant, is it true you grounded the airline? Do you plan to sue? What happens next? He paused only once, at the threshold between the quiet of the cabin and the chaos of the world outside. Then he said softly, You'll find out when we take off again. And with that, he walked through the terminal, his reflection sliding across the polished floor, the murmurs following him like a current. For everyone watching, it was a story about power. For Marcus, it was simply about staying seated until the truth stood up. By the time Marcus Grant left the terminal, the night had deepened into that strange quiet that only airports can hold half asleep, half awake, buzzing with the low hum of electricity and waiting engines. Outside, rain fell steadily, turning the runway lights into long ribbons of gold and red. He didn't rush. He never did. He walked through the glass corridor with a calm that seemed to slow everything around him. People turned their heads as he passed, unsure if they should speak or simply watch. Some clapped quietly. Others just nodded, as though they knew something important had shifted. Even if they didn't yet understand what, Ava's voice came through the phone before he even touched the screen. Sir, it's done. Aero West systems are all in review. Every major network is covering it. CNN, NBC, even late-night news. They're calling it the 28-minute revolution. Marcus stopped near the entrance. His reflection ghosted in the window beside the rain. Revolution, he said softly, as if tasting the word. It's too big a word for one act. Maybe, Ava replied. But sometimes one act shows everyone how small their excuses really are. He smiled faintly. "You sound like my father." "I'll take that as a compliment." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Marcus slipped the phone into his pocket and walked toward the parking deck. The rain didn't bother him. He liked the sound of it, the way it drowned out the noise of the world. His driver, a young man named Trey, waited beside a black sedan, looking both nervous and proud. "Mr. Grant," he said, opening the door quickly. "That was incredible." "Sir, the news everyone's talking about it." Marcus nodded. "They'll talk, then they'll move on. The real work starts after they stop." Trey smiled, uncertain what to say. As the car pulled away from the terminal, the city lights of Chicago reflected in the wet glass. Marcus leaned his head against the seat, eyes unfocused, mind somewhere between exhaustion and clarity. He remembered his father's kitchen again, the chipped tiles, the smell of engine oil on Harold Grant's hands. He remembered asking, "Dad, do people ever change?" His father had answered without looking up from his coffee. "People don't change. Son, they remember. And when they remember enough, they start doing better." Marcus hoped tonight might make a few people remember. Across the city, in a downtown conference room still lit long past midnight, Laura Chen sat at the head of a polished table. She had gathered every senior executive still willing to face the storm. Screens lined the walls, showing live news coverage and social media feeds. The words "Era West grounded nationwide" scrolled in bold letters across every channel. Laura adjusted her glasses and said quietly, "We'll face this head on. No press statements yet, no spin, just facts." A communications director spoke up, nervous. "Ma'am, the board's demanding a response before the market opens." She turned toward him, her voice calm but firm. "The board didn't sit on that plane tonight. We did. They'll get their response when it's ready, not when they panic." She looked around the table, locking eyes with each department head. "We built this airline on the illusion of excellence. But excellence without equality isn't excellence. It's vanity. Starting tomorrow, we rebuild." Someone asked quietly, "And what about Mr. Grant?" Laura paused, thinking of his words. "Patience isn't the same as tolerance. We partner with him," she said, "and we listen." Meanwhile, back in the car, Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Ava. The screen showed an unfamiliar number, but the area code was New York. He hesitated before answering. "This is Marcus." A deep voice spoke on the other end. "Mr. Grant, this is David Porter. I used to work with Aero West years ago. We've met briefly at a leadership summit." Marcus remembered the name. Porter had been a respected operations manager before leaving the company after a public disagreement about safety reforms. "I remember," Marcus said. "What can I do for you?" "Mr. Porter, I just wanted to say thank you." Porter said, "You did what the rest of us couldn't. You forced them to look at themselves." "I didn't force anyone," Marcus replied. "I just didn't move." Porter chuckled softly. "Sometimes that's the loudest thing a man can do." There was a pause, filled only by the hiss of rain on the car windows. Then Porter's tone shifted. "They'll need help. Marcus, real help. If Laura Chen is serious, she's going to face resistance from the top. People like you scare the ones who built the system." Marcus looked out the window at the skyline glittering against the clouds. "Then we'll show them it's not about fear. It's about accountability." "Count me in," Porter said. "Whatever you're building next." Marcus ended the call and sat quietly for a while. The city rolled by in streaks of neon and mist. He could feel the weight of something beginning, not fame or power, but responsibility. When he reached his apartment overlooking the river, the clock read 11:42 p.m. The world outside was still buzzing. Reporters clustered near the building entrance, camera lights flickering like fireflies. Trey glanced at him in the mirror. "Want me to drop you at the garage instead?" Sir Marcus shook his head. "No. Let them see." He stepped out into the rain. The first reporter called his name immediately. "Mr. Grant, did you intentionally trigger the grounding of Arrow West?" He didn't stop walking. "I didn't ground anything," he said. "I just stopped pretending things were fine." Another reporter shouted, "Are you calling for a boycott?" He smiled faintly. "No, I'm calling for awareness." He disappeared through the glass doors, leaving their questions hanging in the storm. Upstairs, his apartment was dim except for the glow of the city outside. He loosened his tie, set his briefcase down, and poured himself a glass of water. His phone buzzed once more, a message from Ava. "Media requests are overwhelming. Everyone wants an interview. Do we respond?" He typed slowly, "Not yet. Silence speaks louder right now." He stood at the window, watching as lightning lit up the skyline. Somewhere across that city, planes sat motionless on runways, waiting for clearance to fly again. It felt like a metaphor too perfect to ignore. The world wasn't grounded because of him. It was grounded because it needed to look in the mirror before it took off again. The next morning would bring headlines, calls, endless meetings. But for now, the city exhaled. Far below, a cab splashed through the puddles, carrying a young journalist who couldn't stop thinking about what she'd witnessed. Elena Cruz uploaded her final edit at exactly midnight. Her voiceover was soft but powerful. He didn't fight. He didn't shout. He just sat still long enough for truth to catch up. By dawn, her video had reached 20 million views. People were calling it the power of stillness. Politicians quoted it. Universities planned to use it in ethics classes. And somewhere in a boardroom, Laura Chen prepared for a battle that would define her career. As for Marcus, he finally allowed himself to rest. He lay down on the couch, rain still tapping on the window, and whispered the words that had become his compass. "Stay who you are." Outside, the city lights shimmered on the water, bending and straightening again, like the reflection of a man who refused to bend when it mattered most. And for the first time in years, Marcus Grant closed his eyes and slept not as a CEO, not as an activist, but as a man who had finally made peace with his silence. Morning came softly, wrapped in gray light. Chicago looked quieter than usual, as if the whole city had taken a collective breath. The storm had passed, but the streets still shimmered with rain. Marcus Grant woke before dawn, the sky outside his window still half asleep. He sat up slowly, running a hand across his face. The events of the night before played back in fragments the voice of Laura Chen, the sound of rain against the window, the way silence had felt heavier than words. For the first time in years, Marcus didn't reach for his phone right away. He just sat there, letting the quiet stretch. When he finally did check, the screen was a flood of notifications, headlines from every major outlet, mentions from public figures, videos dissecting his every movement. He scrolled through them slowly, eyes calm. Black CEO denied seat sparks. Nationwide reform. The 28-minute revolution. When one man refused to move. Marcus Grant, the man who grounded an airline. He set the phone down with a small sigh. Fame wasn't what this was about. It never had been. Ava had left him several messages overnight, all brief and efficient as usual. Laura Chen requesting joint statement. Aero West Board emergency press conference scheduled at 10 a.m. Congressional inquiry into corporate ethics systems trending on Twitter. The world had turned his moment into a movement before he could even speak. He poured himself a cup of coffee and walked to the window. The city below was waking up. Commuters hurrying through puddles, buses rumbling by, the steam from manholes rising into the cold morning air. He remembered his father again, the mornings when Harold would leave for the factory before sunrise, his boots still wet from yesterday's rain. "You can't teach the world to see you right, son," he used to say, "but you can show them what right looks like." Marcus smiled faintly. Maybe, just maybe. That's what last night had done. By 8 o'clock, Ava arrived at his apartment with 2 phones, a tablet, and a bag of breakfast sandwiches he probably wouldn't eat. She looked sharp and composed, but her eyes carried the excitement of someone who had barely slept. "The numbers are insane," she said. 52 million views across all platforms. The president's office issued a statement calling for a review of corporate discrimination standards. "You've officially started a national conversation." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A conversation's good, but conversations end. Systems don't." Ava smirked. "Then we turn the conversation into policy." He took the tablet from her and opened the briefing file she'd prepared. It outlined the structure Laura Chen had proposed: the Athena project, an internal partnership between Novamind Technologies and Aero West Airlines, to integrate bias detection and ethical AI systems into every aspect of their operations. It wasn't just about training, it was about architecture, accountability written into code. As he scrolled, a message popped up on the tablet sidebar. It was from Laura herself. "Meeting room at Aero West headquarters, 9:30 a.m. Please come through the private entrance." He looked up at Ava. "We're going to see them." She nodded. "And the world's going to see you." They arrived downtown just after 9. The streets outside Aero West Tower were crowded with reporters, camera crews, and curious onlookers. Banners fluttered from light poles bearing the airline's logo. The atmosphere was electric, a strange mix of chaos and reverence. Security escorted them through a side door, away from the noise. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and stress. Laura Chen was waiting in the conference room, her posture straight, her expression composed but tired. "Thank you for coming," she said as Marcus entered. He offered a handshake. "I don't think I could have stayed away." She smiled faintly. "Neither could the press. We're live in 30 minutes. I'd like to make a joint announcement. Transparency is the only way forward." He studied her face for a moment. She looked sincere, determined. "What exactly are we announcing?" "That Aero West will be the first airline in the country to embed AI-driven accountability frameworks into every level of its operation," she said firmly. "Hiring, training, performance, even passenger interaction. And that we're partnering with Novamind to do it." Ava raised her eyebrows slightly. "That's a bold move." Laura looked at her. "Bold is overdue." Marcus crossed his arms, pacing slowly. "If you're going to do this, it can't just be a PR play. The moment this becomes about optics, it dies." Laura met his eyes. "Then help us keep it alive." There was a pause, long enough for the weight of it to settle. Marcus finally nodded. "All right, let's begin. At 10 a.m. sharp." The conference began. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled every seat. Microphones crowded the podium. The lights were bright, the kind that make you blink before you speak. Laura took the podium first. Her voice was calm but resolute. She didn't read from notes. She spoke from the heart. "Yesterday, Aero West failed one of its passengers." She began, Not because of policy, but because of perception. We failed to recognize the humanity sitting right in front of us, and we will not hide from that. There was a rustle of movement among the journalists. She continued, "Today, we begin something new. The Athena Project, a partnership with NovaMind Technologies to ensure this never happens again. We're not grounding flights anymore. We're grounding prejudice." The room fell silent for a beat before the applause began soft at first, then rising. Marcus stepped up beside her. He didn't like speeches, but this one was necessary. He looked directly into the cameras. "I've been called a lot of things in the last 24 hours," he said, voice steady. "Activist, victim, hero. I'm none of those. I'm a man who refused to stand up when something wrong was pretending to be right. This isn't about a seat. It's about space. The space we give each other to exist without question." He paused, letting the words breathe. If this moment teaches us anything, let it be this: respect isn't situational, it's structural. Let's build it that way. The applause this time was stronger. Cameras flashed. Some reporters even lowered their mics, as though they understood words couldn't add much more. After the conference, Marcus and Laura walked together through the side corridor. She looked relieved, but cautious. "You know this won't be easy," she said. "The board will push back. Investors will panic. People don't like change. That makes them uncomfortable." Marcus smiled faintly. "Then it's probably the right kind." Outside, the crowd cheered as they stepped through the doors. Flashbulbs burst like lightning. A chant had started among the bystanders. 28 minutes. It rolled through the crowd like a heartbeat. Marcus glanced at Laura. "You realize they've turned this into a movement?" She nodded. "Good. Movements move people." As he got into the car, Ava turned from the front seat. "You handled that perfectly." He looked out the window at the people waving, the signs reading, "Dignity takes off." "We'll see," he said quietly. "Let's make sure this flight actually lands." The city rolled by, alive with noise and purpose. Somewhere above, the clouds began to part, a sliver of sunlight breaking through. It fell across Marcus's face as he leaned back in his seat, the faintest smile touching his lips. Change, he thought, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it began with stillness, and this time the world had finally listened. The applause from the press conference was still echoing in Marcus Grant's mind long after the cameras had shut off. It wasn't the kind of applause that came from excitement. It was the heavy kind, the kind that lingered because people were trying to decide what they had just witnessed. He could feel it in his bones as he walked out of the Aero West headquarters with Laura Chen beside him. The air outside was crisp, sunlight finally breaking through the morning haze. The crowd that had gathered outside the building was larger now, holding signs, phones, and hope all at once. Security escorted them toward the car, but Marcus slowed for a moment near the barriers. Someone shouted his name, a woman in her 40s, holding a small boy by the hand. "Mr. Grant," she called. "My son watched your story last night. He said he wants to grow up to be like you." Marcus turned toward them, his expression softening. The boy waved shyly. Marcus knelt for a moment, just enough to meet the child's eyes. "Don't grow up to be like me," he said gently. "Grow up to be kind, even when people aren't watching." The boy smiled, and the mother wiped her eyes. It was a small moment, but one that would replay on 100 phones before sunset. Inside the car, the mood was quiet. Ava was on her laptop, scanning updates from social media and news outlets. Athena Project already trending #1 worldwide. She said, You and Laura are being called the architects of accountability. Marcus chuckled softly. Catchy. But we're not architects. We're just people fixing the cracks. Laura leaned back in her seat, exhaustion showing in her posture. Cracks that have been there for decades. Then we start filling them, Marcus said, one system at a time. They rode in silence for a while. Outside, Chicago's skyline gleamed with morning light. But Marcus wasn't looking at the view. His mind was already moving ahead, thinking about implementation plans, legal resistance, internal backlash. Change always looked noble in the headlines. The real battle was in the boardrooms. When they reached NovaMind headquarters, reporters had already gathered out front. Security cleared a path as Marcus stepped out. Inside, his staff rose from their desks, some clapping, some simply watching him with quiet pride. He gave them a nod before heading straight to the executive floor. His office was filled with the usual precision-clean lines, glass walls, the soft hum of machines running Athena analytics. But today, it felt different, more alive somehow. He stood by the window, watching the reflection of the city ripple across the mirrored buildings opposite. Ava entered moments later, tablet in hand. We have calls from 5 major corporations, she said. They all want to discuss adopting Athena. Marcus turned toward her. Do we have capacity? Barely, she said. But we can scale if we bring in new hires. He smiled faintly, then start looking for people who care more about doing right than being right. She grinned. That's going to be a short list. Then make it a careful one, he said. At that moment, the intercom buzzed. Mr. Grant, there's a call for you from Aero West board chair. Mr. Lewis? Marcus nodded. Patch it through. A deep voice came over the speaker. Mr. Grant, I wanted to thank you personally for your professionalism this week. You've handled this with more grace than most men would. I appreciate that. Mr. Lewis, Marcus replied, I just want to see progress. Of course, Lewis said. Though I'll be frank, there's been some concern among our senior investors about the optics of this partnership. They're worried the message is turning too political. Marcus's tone remained even. Equality isn't political. Mr. Lewis, it's ethical. And ethics shouldn't make anyone uncomfortable unless they've been ignoring them. There was a pause on the other end. Then Lewis cleared his throat. Understood. We'll move forward as agreed. When the call ended, Marcus leaned against the edge of his desk. Ava watched him carefully. You're pushing them hard, she said. Not hard enough, he replied. They're still thinking in headlines. We need to make them think in generations. Later that afternoon, Laura called from her office. Her tone was brisk but tinged with fatigue. The board approved the full rollout of the Athena project. We start with pilot programs in Los Angeles, Dallas, and Atlanta. You'll oversee integration with our tech teams. Good, Marcus said. But remember, this isn't software. It's accountability. Make sure they understand that. Laura sighed. I'll remind them. Again. As evening fell, Marcus finally stepped outside onto the balcony that overlooked the Chicago River. The water shimmered gold under the streetlights. He could see people across the city, faces glowing in the blue light of their screens, all talking about him. He wasn't sure how to feel about it. Fame was fragile. Impact was what mattered. He pulled his phone from his pocket and opened a message from an unknown number. It read, You don't know me, but I was a flight attendant on Flight 702 working in the back cabin. I saw everything. I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't just change the airline. You changed how I see my job. He stared at the words for a long moment before typing back. then use that change well. That's how it lasts. As he hit send, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video notification. Elena Cruz had uploaded a follow-up documentary titled The Man Who Stayed Seated. Marcus watched it for a moment. Her voice was calm, reflective. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't demand power. He just showed what it looks like when dignity decides it won't move anymore. And somehow, that quietness made the whole world listen. He turned off the screen, smiling slightly. It wasn't pride. It was gratitude that the message had survived translation, that it hadn't been twisted into something performative. The next morning, news outlets confirmed that 2 more airlines had contacted Novamind to discuss adopting similar frameworks. Government committees were forming. University ethics programs had added Athena to their curricula. But for Marcus, the real victory came in smaller moments, the emails from employees who said they felt seen for the first time, the quiet acknowledgments from strangers in airports, the rare but genuine apologies that came from people trying to unlearn old reflexes. That night, he returned home late. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the city beyond the glass. He poured himself a drink and stood by the window again. Somewhere in the reflection, he could almost see his father's face steady, patient, proud. He raised the glass slightly, as if to toast the memory. "We're getting there, Dad," he whispered, "one seat at a time." The city lights blurred slightly in the window, like they were nodding back. Outside, planes began to take off again, their wings cutting through the night sky. This time, Marcus didn't watch them as symbols. He watched them as possibilities, each one carrying people who, maybe now, would be treated with a little more respect than before. And somewhere deep inside, he finally allowed himself to believe that change wasn't a distant dream anymore. It was happening. It was real. It was taking off. The next few weeks moved faster than Marcus Grant could process. What had begun as a confrontation on a single flight had evolved into something far beyond him. Headlines shifted from curiosity to policy. News anchors debated the Grant effect. Corporations held emergency diversity reviews. Even late-night hosts, usually too detached to care, began their monologues with jokes that turned into uncomfortable truths. But Marcus didn't chase the cameras. He stayed grounded, ironically. The same word that had once defined his protest. While the world amplified his name, he kept working in quiet spaces, surrounded by whiteboards filled with code, strategy diagrams, and notes that read human first, always. The Athena project was expanding faster than anyone predicted. Within 30 days, it had been adopted by 3 major airlines and 2 tech firms. Novamind servers were running around the clock, processing thousands of behavioral audits and generating insights on bias that executives couldn't ignore anymore. One morning, Ava walked into his office carrying 2 coffees and a tired smile. "You're trending again," she said. The man who sat down is everywhere. Even the White House posted a statement praising the Grant model for systemic accountability. Marcus accepted the coffee, but didn't react. "It's just a headline," he said quietly. "Headlines fade." Ava smirked. "Maybe, but you've changed how people talk about silence. That doesn't fade." He looked out the window, watching as a plane ascended through the clouds, its reflection streaking across the glass. Let's hope the noise doesn't drown out the meaning. That afternoon, he received a message from Laura Chen asking him to join her at the Aero West Training Center near O'Hare. The facility had been transformed into the testing ground for the new Athena module's real-time bias detection, empathy simulations, and automated accountability protocols for crew interactions. Marcus arrived to find the once sterile training halls filled with energy. Screens flickered with case studies. Flight attendants practiced new passenger scenarios under the supervision of Nova-Mind engineers. Laura met him near the main simulator, her face lit by the pale glow of monitors. "Welcome to Ground Zero," she said. "This is where the future of fairness takes off." Marcus smiled. "Looks like you've built more than a system." She nodded. "We're building a culture." They walked together through the training bay. In one corner, Kara Hastings stood with a small group of new hires. Her uniform was crisp, but her demeanor was different now, softer, more grounded. She caught Marcus's eye and smiled, a quiet acknowledgement that needed no words. "She's one of our lead instructors now," Laura said. "Her training module's called The Seat You Don't See." Marcus tilted his head. "That's powerful." "She built it herself," Laura said. "Every trainee spends an hour sitting in a simulation of being mistaken for less than they are. It's not punishment, it's perspective." Marcus paused, watching Kara demonstrate a scenario for the group. He could see the shift in her posture, the way her empathy had turned from apology into action. For the first time in weeks, he felt something unfamiliar peace. Later that day, Marcus joined Laura in the observation room, overlooking the floor. "We've had pushback," she admitted. "Not everyone's comfortable with this level of transparency. Some think it's too invasive." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Change always feels invasive to those who benefit from things staying the same." She smiled faintly. "You always have a way of putting truth into one sentence. It's my only gift," he said lightly. But that evening, the conversation turned heavier. Reports began to surface of resistance within Aero West senior leadership. Anonymous leaks suggested that certain board members were lobbying to suspend the Athena project after the first phase. They argued that the technology was too disruptive and created internal friction. Laura called Marcus immediately. "They're scared," she said, her voice tight. "Of what he asked, of being seen." She replied, "The system doesn't just track actions, it tracks patterns, and patterns reveal power." Marcus was silent for a moment. "Then we keep the lights on," he said finally. The next morning, a major business network aired an interview with one of Aero West's investors questioning the long-term viability of Athena. Stocks wavered. Social media buzzed with speculation. Commentators began to ask if Marcus had gone too far, if accountability could ever coexist with profit. Ava slammed her laptop shut after watching the segment. "They're trying to paint you as a threat to business, Marcus. They're scared of what you represent." He didn't look up from his desk. "If they're scared of fairness, they should be." Laura called again later that night. Her tone was different, now urgent, tired. "The board's holding an emergency session tomorrow. They want me to freeze the next rollout until we are assessed public sentiment." Marcus sighed softly. "Public sentiment doesn't need reassessment. It needs leadership." "I know," she said. "That's why I need you there." The next morning, the boardroom was filled with polished shoes, expensive suits, and expressions that looked more rehearsed than honest. Laura stood at the head of the table, Marcus beside her. Mr. Lewis sat opposite them, his face unreadable. He began smoothly. "Mr. Grant, no one here doubts your intentions, but we must balance ethics with sustainability. Investors are nervous. We're bleeding money. Perhaps it's time to slow down." Marcus's voice was calm but unwavering. "You don't fix a burning house by slowing down the hose." The room went still. Lewis frowned. "This is not a crusade." "No," Marcus said, meeting his gaze. "It's a course correction." Laura spoke next, her tone firmer than before. Athena stays. We've seen measurable improvement in passenger satisfaction and crew accountability. If this board decides otherwise, I'll resign." A murmur spread through the room. Lewis's composure cracked for the first time. "You'd walk away from 20 years at this company." Laura looked at Marcus, then back at the board. "If integrity isn't welcome here, then it's not a company I belong to." The silence that followed was heavy, but it spoke volumes. Finally, one of the younger board members cleared his throat. "Mr. Lewis, perhaps it's time we listen instead of react. The public supports this. So do our employees." Lewis exhaled sharply, realizing the vote was turning against him. "Very well," he said at last. Athena continues, "But this board will monitor its progress closely." Marcus stood. "Monitor all you want," he said. "Just don't forget to participate." When the meeting ended, Laura joined him outside the glass doors. The tension drained from her face. "I think we just won," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, we just kept the sky open a little longer." That evening, as he drove home, the sunset burned red over the skyline. Marcus rolled down the window, letting the wind cut through the quiet. The radio host was talking about the meeting, praising Aero West's decision to uphold the Athena project. For once, the world wasn't spinning the story. It was understanding it. He thought about the boy at the barricade, about Kara's class, about his father's words echoing through memory. Maybe this was what progress looked like, not fast, not clean, but real. He pulled into his driveway, looked up at the darkening sky, and smiled. Somewhere up there, planes were flying again, safer, fairer, freer. And for the first time since that day on Flight 702, Marcus Grant let himself believe that the sky was finally beginning to listen. The city had learned to say his name, not as a headline now, not as a hashtag, but as something quieter, a symbol whispered in boardrooms, classrooms, and airports. Marcus Grant had become more than the man from Flight 702. He was an idea, a mirror, a reminder that staying seated sometimes makes more noise than shouting ever could. It was early spring when the Athena project completed its first official cycle. Aero West released data showing a measurable 47% increase in employee satisfaction, a 31% drop in discrimination-related complaints, and something harder to quantify: trust. The numbers were everywhere, but Marcus wasn't looking at numbers. He was looking at people. He stood on the observation deck of the new Aero West Training Center, watching a new class of flight attendants run through empathy simulations. Among them was Kara Hastings, her presence calm but confident, guiding trainees through scenarios that would once have made her nervous. Her voice carried clearly through the intercom. "When you assume, you erase. When you listen, you restore." Marcus smiled faintly. The line had become a mantra across the company. Laura Chen stepped beside him, tablet in hand. "You know," she said, "you've turned a corporate compliance program into something that actually means something." He turned to her. "No. You did that. I just stayed in my seat." She laughed softly. "You're still too humble for your own legend." He shrugged. "Legends fade. Culture stays." Laura's phone buzzed with a message. "The board wants a follow-up announcement. They're considering expanding Athena to partner airlines overseas. London, Frankfurt, Tokyo." "That's good," he said. "But don't make it about reach. Make it about depth. If this becomes another export of American guilt, it'll lose its soul." She nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that thought. "You always remind me why this matters, because it's easy to forget," he said. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the trainees laughed together after an exercise. The atmosphere felt different from the first time Marcus had stepped into this place. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was hopeful. Later that afternoon, Marcus returned to Novamind headquarters. The walls were filled with new teams, now engineers, sociologists, ethics consultants, and data scientists. The line between tech and humanity was blurring, and for once, that felt right. Ava met him at the elevator, her energy as relentless as ever. "Big news," she said, handing him a folder. "Harvard just requested a full Athena demo for their Kennedy School of Government. They want to integrate it into public leadership training." Marcus flipped through the papers. "That's unexpected." Ava grinned. "Change inspires curiosity. People want to learn how you did it." He glanced up from the papers. "We didn't do it. The world just decided to stop looking away." She tilted her head, studying him. "You still don't see it, do you? You gave people permission to care again?" He smiled faintly, but said nothing. Instead, he walked toward the conference room where his leadership team was waiting. The room was filled with a hum of anticipation. Screens displayed the company's global expansion metrics. Maps glowed with points of light marking every organization that had adopted Athena. Marcus looked around the table. "Before we talk numbers, I want to remind you why we're here. The moment this becomes about profit, it dies. So before we celebrate, ask yourself, is the system making people better, or just making us richer?" The room went quiet. His tone wasn't reprimanding. It was grounding. He'd learned that real leadership didn't come from inspiration. It came from reminding people of their humanity when success tried to erase it. After the meeting, Marcus lingered in his office. On his desk sat a letter, hand-delivered that morning. It was from the boy he'd met outside Aero West headquarters weeks ago. The handwriting was uneven, the ink smudged. "Dear Mr. Grant, my mom says I should write to people who make me think. I don't really know what to say except thank you. I told my teacher what you said about being kind when no one's watching. Now our class has a rule called the seat rule. If someone gets left out, we save them a seat until they come back. Sincerely, Ethan." Marcus read it twice, then a third time. His eyes softened. That one letter meant more than all the headlines in the world. He turned to look at the city outside his window, the skyline glowing against the dusk. For the first time, he felt something close to peace. But peace didn't mean stillness anymore. It meant readiness. There was more work to do. That evening, Laura called him again. Her voice sounded lighter. "You might want to see this," she said. "Aero West just aired our new training film. It's based on Flight 702. Marcus hesitated. "I didn't approve that." "You don't have to," Laura said. "It's not a reenactment. It's a reflection." He found the video online a few minutes later. It opened with a slow shot of a plane taxiing in golden light. A voiceover, soft and familiar, spoke. "Sometimes change doesn't arrive with noise. Sometimes it lands in silence." The film didn't show his face or his name. It simply told the story of a passenger who chose not to move, and a company that learned how to. As the music swelled, the screen faded to black with a simple phrase, "Respect takes flight." Marcus closed the laptop slowly. The message had traveled farther than he ever intended, but maybe that was the point. The next morning, his assistant buzzed through. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." He frowned. "Who, Kara Hastings?" she said. He stood as Kara entered. She looked different, confident, grounded. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said. "I just wanted to thank you. In person. for giving me another chance." Marcus shook his head. "You gave yourself that chance?" She smiled. "Maybe, but you stayed long enough for me to take it." They sat for a moment, the air between them filled with quiet understanding. She looked around his office, the awards, the newspaper covers, the small photo of his father by the window. "Do you ever miss the days before all this?" she asked softly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "when the world was smaller and simpler. But then I remember simpler wasn't always better." Kara nodded. "Thank you for reminding us we could be better." When she left, Marcus sat alone for a while, turning the words over in his mind. Better. Not perfect. Just better. Maybe that was the real goal all along. That night, as he walked home along the river, he saw a billboard glowing across the skyline. It wasn't an advertisement. It was a quote, painted over the city lights. "Sometimes you win by staying seated. M. D. Grant." He stopped for a moment, watching the reflection of the words ripple on the water. A quiet laugh escaped his lips. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent his life moving, building, traveling, leading only to discover that his most powerful act was the moment he didn't move at all. As the evening breeze swept across the water, he whispered to himself, "Maybe that's how we all learn to fly." And with that, Marcus Grant disappeared into the rhythm of the city, not as a headline, not as a hero, but as a reminder that stillness, when chosen with purpose, can change the world. It had been nearly 6 months since that day on Flight 702, and yet the echoes of it still shaped everything Marcus Grant touched. The Athena project had spread to 5 continents now. It was no longer just a corporate tool, it had become a philosophy. Governments were studying it, universities were dissecting it, and everyday people were quoting it. The phrase "dignity in data" had become the centerpiece of Nova Mind's mission statement. But with success came scrutiny. The louder the praise, the deeper the questions grew. Critics argued that Athena's monitoring systems were invasive. Others accused Marcus of building digital morality, a new kind of surveillance wrapped in ethics. The media, hungry for tension, called it the price of conscience. Marcus didn't argue back. He knew better than to fight noise with more noise. On a chilly Friday morning, Marcus arrived at Nova Mind headquarters earlier than usual. The lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. Ava was waiting for him at his office door, a folder clutched in her hands. "You need to see this," she said. Inside the folder was a report, leaked documents, analysis from unnamed sources. The headline glared back at him. "Athena under fire, data misuse allegations emerge." Someone was claiming that a regional branch of Aero West had manipulated Athena's reporting system to suppress internal complaints and protect senior managers. Marcus read every line in silence. When he finished, he set the folder down carefully. "Is it true?" Ava hesitated. "We're still verifying, but it looks like someone used the framework's audit filters to bury incidents. It wasn't the system, Marcus. It was people using it wrong." Marcus leaned back, exhaling slowly. "It always comes back to people, doesn't it?" Ava nodded. "The board wants to know how we'll respond." "By doing what we promised," he said, "holding everyone accountable, even ourselves, within hours." He was on a flight to Los Angeles, where the branch office operated. As the plane lifted off, he looked out the window, the same view that had once been his battleground. 6 months ago, he'd stayed seated to make a point. Now, he was moving again to protect what that point had created. At the Aero West headquarters, Laura Chen was waiting. Her expression was tense, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. "I was afraid this would happen," she said quietly. Power never goes unchallenged for long. Marcus followed her into the conference room. Screens covered the walls, displaying Athena dashboards filled with red flags. We traced the manipulation, Laura said. It was one executive. He altered the transparency protocols to hide bias reports from public metrics. We've already suspended him. Marcus didn't speak for a moment. He just stared at the screens, at the digital proof that even the best systems could be twisted when human intent faltered. Athena wasn't built to catch every lie, he said softly. It was built to reveal what truth looks like when people want to see it, but it can't make them look. Laura sighed. The press will turn this into a scandal. Let them, Marcus replied. Better a storm than silence. Later that afternoon, Marcus called a press conference himself. Cameras filled the room, reporters buzzing with questions. He stood at the podium, his voice steady and low. There are allegations of misuse within Athena's reporting structure. We take full responsibility for finding out what happened, why it happened, and how to ensure it never happens again. Accountability doesn't end when we're comfortable. It begins when we're tested. He paused, letting the words breathe. The system didn't fail us. We failed the system. But failure isn't the opposite of progress. It's the cost of it. The reporters scribbled furiously. Some looked surprised. They weren't used to hearing corporate leaders speak without deflection. Marcus stepped down from the podium and walked past the flashing cameras. The noise of it all felt distant, muted by the weight of reality. That evening, he met with Laura and Kara at a quiet restaurant near the airport. Kara looked tired but hopeful. People will twist this, she said. They'll say Athena's broken. Marcus shook his head. They can say what they want. Systems break all the time. What matters is who repairs them. Laura nodded slowly. We'll get through this. Not if we rush, Marcus said. We rebuild the trust the same way we earned it, one decision at a time. The next morning, as the sun rose over Los Angeles, Marcus sat alone in the terminal lounge. His flight back to Chicago was delayed, but he didn't mind. The irony made him smile. Maybe the universe was reminding him that some delays have purpose. He took out his notebook, an old habit from before the fame, before the company. On the first blank page, he wrote 3 words: patience, precision, purpose. Then, beneath it, he added, never faster than trust. His phone buzzed. A message from Ava appeared. Public response positive. Your honesty struck a chord. People are saying this proves Athena works not because it's perfect, but because it admits imperfection. Marcus smiled faintly. Good, he replied. That's the point. When he finally boarded his flight, the cabin lights were dim, the passengers quiet. As he settled into his seat, the flight attendant, a young man with kind eyes, approached him nervously. Mr. Grant, he said softly, I just wanted to say thank you. My sister works for Aero West. The new training changed her life. She said people listen to her now. Marcus looked up, surprised. Tell her she changed theirs too, he said with a warm smile. The attendant smiled back, then moved down the aisle. For a moment, Marcus let himself breathe. The hum of the engine soothed him. The seatbelt light blinked overhead. He closed his eyes and remembered the first time he'd sat in a seat like this, when the world had looked at him and seen something less. Now, it saw him as more than a man, maybe too much more. He thought about his father again, about those quiet evenings in their old kitchen. Harold Grant had once said, "You can teach machines right from wrong, but it won't matter until people start doing it too." Marcus understood now. The technology was never the answer. It was just a mirror. When the plane landed in Chicago, the sky was heavy with gray clouds. Marcus stepped out into the brisk air. Coat collar turned up. Cameras were waiting, as always. But this time he didn't stop. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. Some moments demanded silence, not as retreat, but as respect. That night, as rain began to fall again, Marcus sat by his window with a single lamp lighting the room. The city below shimmered with reflections of light and water. He opened his laptop and began typing a new statement, not for the press, but for himself. Legacy isn't built on moments of victory. It's built on how we respond when our victories are tested. If stillness taught me strength, then struggle teaches me truth. And truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. He stopped typing, looked at the screen, and whispered to himself, maybe that's what the seat was always about. Not defiance, reflection. Outside, thunder rumbled across the skyline. The world was still loud, but inside that quiet room, Marcus Grant knew exactly who he was, a man who once refused to stand, and who now stood so others could finally sit in peace. 1 year had passed since Flight 702. 1 year since a quiet refusal had grounded an entire airline and lifted an entire movement. But for Marcus Grant, time hadn't dulled the memory. It had reshaped it. The day that once burned with humiliation had turned into a compass, guiding every decision he made since. Chicago in early spring was cold, bright, and unpredictable, much like change itself. The skyline shimmered beneath thin sunlight as Marcus stood by his window at NovaMind headquarters. He had aged slightly in the past year, not in the lines of his face, but in the depth of his silence. He didn't need to speak as often now. His presence carried the story. Ava entered with her usual rhythm-confident steps, tablet in hand. "Morning," she said cheerfully. "You ready for the anniversary event?" Marcus looked at her reflection in the glass. "Ready as I'll ever be." "They're expecting a big speech," she added. "Media from 30 countries, dignitaries, students, even the Secretary of Transportation." He smiled slightly. "It's strange, isn't it? The world celebrating a man who didn't stand up?" Ava grinned. "Sometimes sitting down makes everyone else move." He turned to face her, buttoning his jacket. "Then let's make sure they keep moving for the right reasons." Later that afternoon, the Aero West Global Ethics Summit began. The ballroom was grand, lined with banners bearing the Athena emblem, a symbol that had once been nothing more than an idea scribbled on Marcus's notepad. Cameras flashed as leaders, journalists, and activists filled the seats. The hum of anticipation filled the air. Laura Chen stood backstage, headset on, managing the final preparations. When she saw Marcus approach, she gave a small nod. "They're ready for you," she said softly. "And Marcus, whatever you say out there, make it count." He smiled. It always counts when it comes from truth. As he stepped onto the stage, the applause began not thunderous, but steady, respectful, the kind of sound that carried weight. He waited for it to fade before speaking. "A year ago," he began, his voice calm and measured, "I was just a passenger trying to get home. I didn't plan to make a statement. I didn't plan to challenge anything. But sometimes, the moment finds you before you find it." The room was silent now. Cameras zoomed in on his face, capturing every nuance of his tone. "I was denied a seat because someone decided what I looked like didn't match where I belonged." That moment could have stayed small, an incident forgotten before the next flight took off. But the reason it didn't is because people were tired. Tired of being unseen. Tired of silence being mistaken for acceptance. He paused, letting the stillness breathe. The Athena Project wasn't born from outrage. It was born from patience, the kind that refuses to rot into bitterness. It was built on the belief that we can measure fairness as surely as we measure flight paths. Applause rippled through the room. "But make no mistake," he continued, his tone deepening, "no system, no technology, no policy can save us from ourselves. Only humility can do that. Only the willingness to admit that we've been wrong and that we can do better." He looked out at the audience, at faces young and old, black and white, leaders and dreamers. "If this story means anything," he said softly, "it means that dignity doesn't need permission. It just needs courage." When the applause came again, it was longer, warmer, rising like a tide. Cameras flashed, people stood, and Marcus bowed his head slightly in gratitude. After the speech, the press surged forward, but he slipped quietly out a side door. Laura followed him into the hallway. "You realize you just gave one of the most quoted speeches of the year." "Right," she said, half smiling. Marcus chuckled. "Then I hope they quote the right parts." She studied him for a moment. "You could run for office, you know. People trust you." He shook his head gently. "The moment I chase power, I lose what gave me purpose." Laura nodded slowly. Still the same Marcus. He smiled. Still learning. That evening, the city glowed with celebration. Screens across downtown played highlights of the summit. Hashtags trended again. But this time, they felt different, quieter, more grounded. People weren't just talking about Marcus Grant anymore. They were talking about the people he'd inspired. In one of the airport lounges, Kara Hastings watched the live broadcast with her team. She had become the director of training for Aero West now, leading initiatives across the country. As Marcus's words echoed through the room, she looked around at the new recruits, young, diverse, hopeful. "Remember that," she said. "Every passenger, every flight. It's not just service, it's stewardship." Back in his apartment, Marcus poured himself a glass of water and sat by the window, the city lights flickering below. On his desk lay a letter, handwritten, stamped with an overseas postmark. He opened it carefully. "Dear Mr. Grant, my name is Amina. I work as a flight attendant for Aero West Africa. I joined because of your story. Last month, I stopped a situation before it turned into something ugly. A passenger thanked me for how I handled it. I just wanted to say thank you. You reminded me that respect isn't cultural, it's universal." Marcus smiled as he read the final line. It was simple, sincere. That was how change spread, not in speeches or headlines, but in moments like these, repeated quietly across the world. Ava called him a few minutes later. "You did good today," she said. "People are still talking about it." He leaned back, looking out at the skyline. "Talking isn't enough," he said softly. "We need to listen too." There was a pause. "You think the world's ready for that?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "It's learning, and that's enough." Later that night, he visited a small park near the lake, the same one he used to walk through when he needed to think. The wind was cold, carrying the smell of rain and city smoke. He sat on a bench, looking up at the distant trail of planes crossing the night sky. A small boy and his mother walked by, the boy pointing upward. "Mom, is that the man from the plane?" he whispered. She smiled, recognizing Marcus but saying nothing. "Maybe," she said softly. "But what he did matters more than who he is." Marcus smiled at that, a quiet, private smile. He stayed there until the park lights flickered on, the world settling into another ordinary night. For the first time in a long while, he felt something that had eluded him for years. Not victory, not pride. Just peace, the kind that comes when the storm has passed, and the sky remembers how to be clear again. Before he left, he whispered into the air, "Thank you, Dad. We made it." And somewhere above the clouds, maybe the sky whispered back. A year and a half after that flight, the world had moved on in the way the world always does. The headlines had faded. The hashtags had quieted. But the story of Marcus Grant had not disappeared. It had simply folded itself into the fabric of everyday life, whispered through small acts of fairness in places that once overlooked them. In airports across America, subtle changes marked his legacy. Gate agents now paused before making assumptions. Training programs still carried his words, and every so often, a passenger sitting quietly in first class would draw a second glance, not of suspicion, but of self-awareness. On a bright morning in June, Marcus walked through Chicago O'Hare, the same terminal where everything began, the same gate, the same view of planes taking off, each one carving a white trail through the endless blue. He wasn't traveling for business this time. There were no reporters waiting, no boardrooms to face, no speeches to give, just a man catching a flight to visit his mother in Atlanta. As he approached the counter, the young attendant smiled warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Grant. We've upgraded your seat to 1A. On behalf of Aero West, thank you for everything you've done for us." He smiled back, humbled. "Thank you, but I think you've all done that yourselves." She laughed softly. "Still, it started with you." He nodded gently and walked toward the gate. But as he handed over his boarding pass, he paused. "What's your name, Jessica?" she said. "Well, Jessica," he said, "keep treating people like they matter. That's the real upgrade." Her smile widened as she nodded. "On board." The hum of the cabin felt familiar but not haunting anymore. The air seemed lighter, the faces softer. Across the aisle, a young man with headphones was watching a documentary on his tablet. The screen flickered with Marcus's face from an old interview. He caught Marcus looking and smiled awkwardly. "That's you, isn't it?" Marcus chuckled. "Once upon a time." The young man laughed. "Man, that video changed how I think about everything. I work in customer service now. My boss calls it the Grant Rule. We don't talk over people anymore." Marcus leaned back, smiling. "That's a good rule." As the plane taxied down the runway, he closed his eyes, feeling the vibration of the engines. He wasn't nervous anymore. There was something deeply poetic about being in the air again, the same place where his quiet defiance had begun. He looked out the window as the ground fell away, the city shrinking beneath him, the sky opening up like forgiveness. Hours later, he arrived in Atlanta. The air was heavy with summer, thick with humidity and nostalgia. His mother's house stood the same as always, white shutters, small garden, wind chime by the porch. When she opened the door, her face broke into a smile that made time disappear. "Baby, you didn't tell me you were coming," she said, pulling him into a hug. "I needed a reminder of what home feels like," he said softly. She laughed, leading him inside. "The world treating you right now?" "It's learning," he said, smiling, "just like me." They sat on the porch that evening, the sound of cicadas humming through the warm air. His mother rocked gently in her chair, watching the light fade. "Your father would be proud, you know," she said. Marcus looked out toward the horizon. "I hope so. I think about him every day." She nodded. "He always said you'd do something that mattered, but I don't think he imagined it would change the world." Marcus smiled faintly. Neither did I. I just wanted a seat. His mother chuckled softly, shaking her head. And you got one for everybody. They sat in silence for a while. The sky above them streaked with orange and pink. Somewhere far off, a plane crossed the sunset. Marcus watched it glide across the horizon, its lights blinking against the dimming sky. That night, after his mother went to bed, he walked out into the yard and looked up at the stars. The air smelled like honeysuckle and memory. He took out his phone, scrolled through his messages, and opened a new note. He began typing slowly. To whoever finds this, remember, progress doesn't start with outrage. It starts with empathy. The smallest act of dignity can rewrite the largest story. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to stay still long enough for the world to see you clearly. He saved the note, then set the phone down beside him. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to say more. Back in Chicago, at NovaMind headquarters, Ava was preparing a global update for the Athena project. She was now the company's COO, her leadership as steady as Marcus's had once been. Laura Chen had joined the board of directors, steering Aero West through its most successful year in decades. Kara Hastings continued to train thousands of staff around the world, and in every meeting room, above every doorway, a single quote was engraved in brushed steel. Integrity doesn't ask for attention, it earns it. The next morning, Marcus returned to the airport for his flight home. As he walked through security, a little girl waved at him from behind the checkpoint. Her father bent down and whispered something in her ear. The girl called out shyly, "Thank you." "Mr. Grant?" He stopped, smiled, and waved back. "You're welcome." When he boarded the plane and sat in seat 1A, the world felt perfectly still for a moment, as if time itself paused to remember. The flight attendant offered him water. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Grant," she said. He smiled gently. "It's good to be back." As the plane began to rise through the clouds, Marcus looked down at the world below the fields, the cities, the roads threading across the land. Somewhere down there, 1,000 stories were beginning, 1,000 moments of quiet courage waiting to happen. He leaned his head back, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Here's to every seat that teaches someone to stand taller." The engines hummed softly as the plane disappeared into the clouds, leaving behind nothing but a trail of white against an endless blue, a reminder that one act of quiet dignity can reach farther than the sky itself. And so the story of the man who stayed seated ended not in applause, but in peace, the kind of peace that lingers when the world finally learns to listen. Marcus Grant's story is more than just a journey of a black man denied a first-class seat. It's a lesson in how people confront injustice not with anger, but with dignity. In today's world, where loud words often overwhelm quiet actions, Marcus reminds us that sometimes true power comes from remaining calm when we have every reason to be angry. It also reminds us that justice is not just about laws or technology, but about our own choices. We may not be able to change the past, but we can always choose how we respond to change the future. If just one person dares to sit in their right seat, the whole world can stop and think. And who knows, in your daily life, you may have a similar moment, a situation that forces you to choose between silence and courage. In that case, remember Marcus, and remember, your calm can be the most powerful voice. Thank you for listening to this story. If you believe the world needs more stories of kindness and dignity, please like, share, and subscribe to help us spread the good values. Together, starting with small things, let's change the way the world treats each other.